Howdy. This is another episode of The World This Week. Actually, The World Last Week. Since it's Tuesday, it's a little slow this week. Let's get right to it. First off, got a story, power theft surge in bad times. As the dismal economy spawns desperate measures, some Americans are resorting to a hazardous practice, stealing electricity. Many utilities say energy theft has risen sharply during the economic downturn. Culprits include residential customers whose power is turned off when they fall behind on their bills, and small businesses struggling to keep their doors open. Basically, be careful out there with those power lines. The electrons hurt when they run through your body so fast. Now, speaking of the economy, got Obama talking about... President Barack Obama says the economy is causing a lot of families incredible pain and hardship, but the government is providing them help. President spoke to reporters in the Oval Office. This was last Friday. Working on short-term and long-term recovery plans. I'll cover a couple of those. We're in an interesting time, of course, as you know. What's going on here? We'll cover a couple more stories. Let's see. Their strategy for trying to get their budget passed is having some problems because they're doing such a big budget change, and nobody likes the way they're doing it, really, even a lot of the other people. There's a few things they can do. The way the Senate has gotten so bad now with the filibusters, you have to basically have 60 votes to make something happen. You can get around it by doing the temporary measures like Bush did with his tax cuts, which is why they're going to expire, because they went around it and just got the up or down vote. So we'll see how that goes. We got some good news, actually, on the home front. It says new home building unexpectedly rebounded across the country last month as builders increased their housing starts to 583,000, an annual pace from a record low of 477 set in January. Basically, we had a big jump from January to February, which is still like 40% below last year in the same area. And most of this is in the South, and nationwide it was, let's see where they go. Yeah, the only region was in the West, where it dropped another 24.6%. They're pretty much screwed over there with the housing stuff, which is what screwed everyone else when the bubble popped. There is another good thing they did. Obama availed the step to make sure financing was available for small businesses, injecting capital into the system by buying up to $15 billion in securities backed by small business loans. The funds would come from the TARP, the Troubled Asset Relief Program, approved by Congress to help stabilize ailing financial institutions. Geithner pressed U.S. banks to lend money to small businesses, citing the extraordinary protections the government had put in place to shed banks from risk. I actually had a conversation. There's a sports bar in the area called Frankie's, and I'm Facebook friends with a guy, Bill Katz, who runs it, and or allegedly runs it. They just actually got a loan to open up a new place. So this is kind of the small business, how it's working. So they're going to be opening up a new place in Louisville, which is good news for the neighborhood here, and he's pretty excited. Then I pointed out that it was part of Obama's strategy to get this money flowing, and he was like, meh. He's not a big fan. I've had a few good discussions on that. Then the Fed came out, and it says, let's see. After closing at its lowest level in 12 years on March 9th, the Dow has climbed more than 14%, and the S&P 500 has gained 17% over the same period. Stocks were lower throughout this morning that this happened, but turned sharply higher after the Fed announced its plan to increase liquidity in credit markets over the next 6 months. By purchasing the $300 billion in longer-term treasuries, the central bank hopes to bring down interest rates on other types of debt tied to the bond market, corporate debt and mortgage loans, and ease the flow of credit. The Fed also announced plans to buy an additional $750 billion in mortgage-backed securities. What they're doing essentially is printing money like mad. I had a video a couple weeks ago about a guy in the Russian economy when deflation started hitting. If they don't print the money, that's what's going to happen. And this is what there's another Salon article from Andrew Leonard. It says, there's no secret that economists Tyler Cohen and Paul Krugman have profound differences on the proper role of how government should manage the economy. Over the course of the ongoing economic crisis, they've engaged in an enlightening debate about such topics as the effectiveness of Keynesian fiscal stimulus policies via their respective blogs and New York Times columns. The libertarian-minded Cohen is a fiscal stimulus skeptic. Krugman notoriously is not. So when the two men both greeted with muted support the surprise news about the Fed stuff I was just talking about, plan to engage in an aggressive strategy of quantitative easing to loosen up the credit crunch, you had to take notice. Basically, they both like this. The Fed announced on Wednesday that it'll buy $1.2 trillion. $1.2 trillion. That's how much we've printed up to try and catch up to this thing. And to provide greater support to mortgage lending and housing markets and to help improve conditions in private credit markets. So they're throwing a bunch of cash at the problem. It's really about all they can do at this point since the interest rates are so low as they kept cutting them and cutting them and cutting them to keep the thing going, and then it went. So they're going on there. Some people are not so happy with it. One of them, in their next story, is China. China, actually, this was from today on Tuesday in reaction to this stuff last week. Because China, remember if you watched last week, I talked about how they were wondering about all our money. And so we printed up $1 trillion, be like, oh yeah, we got it, no problem. So China comes out and says, China is calling for a new global currency controlled by the International Monetary Fund, stepping up pressure ahead of its London summit on global leaders to a financial system dominated. They want to change the system that we have now, dominated by the U.S. dollar and Western governments, obviously. China's making a lot of noise now because they own a lot of this debt, and they're like, no, you can't just print up money. We want something else. So the comments in an essay by the Chinese central bank governor released late Monday reflected Beijing's growing assertiveness in economic affairs. China is expected to press for developing countries to have a bigger say in finance when leaders of the group of 20 major economies meet April 2nd in London to discuss the global crisis. They didn't mention the dollar by name, but it's pretty obvious what they're trying to do here. You have to excuse me, my allergies are killing me. This is what happens in Texas after it starts to rain in the springtime. It rains a little bit and all the trees go and my nose goes. So pardon my sniffles. Yeah, so China's just getting a little worried about what's going on with this. They're going to bring it up and be like, hey, this old dollar thing, maybe we should change that. Next one. Oh, this goes on to what the Republicans are doing. They're going to have Palin to keynote a Senate House GOP dinner. Really, the Palin thing, guys, not going to work. It's just not. I mean, if you guys want to keep pushing it, that's fine. And it's going to be really hard to get any kind of support for her outside of people who have any idea what's going on. Because she's one of those people who doesn't really and talks like she doesn't. Yeah, and Cornyn from Texas, Governor Palin has quickly emerged as one of the most popular and recognizable faces in the Republican Party. Called her a breath of fresh air from the business-as-usual crowd in Washington. One of our party's up-and-coming young governors who will play a critical role in rebuilding our efforts. Yeah. He's talked about she electrified and energized crowds across the country. What he's missing is that was just the hardcore Republican people. All the independents are like, you gotta be kidding me. And everybody else was like, no way. So, not so good with that. They also, George Stephanopoulos did a Twitter view with John McCain, which was really, really bad. I read it. You basically have 140 characters to respond. That's not how you're supposed to do interviews. It really was just like Facebook status updates back and forth. I mean, that's not a good way to have an in-depth conversation. Really pretty much a waste of time on that. But at least, they're trying to get him involved. Let me pause and then we'll come back and do a little bit on AIG, which was really a big story last week. And pretty funny, ultimately, how it turned out.